I really wanted to find out more about Sarah, tell her story at the same time, tell my grandmother's story, who also, her story did not have necessarily a happy ending either. And I just felt like it was my way of perhaps giving justice to these two girls who lived in a time where women and children were not treated well. And there are many things I came across that really parallel things that we struggle with today.
Welcome to the True Fiction Project, a podcast series that explores the origins of fiction. Every week, we begin with an interview, nonfiction, followed by a creative piece, fiction, inspired by something from the interview. The idea is to demonstrate, of course, that fiction is born out of our life experiences. Now, here's your host, storyteller, author, public speaker, health and wellness expert, Reenita Hora.
Welcome to the True Fiction Project. I am your host, Reenita Hora. And the question for today is, who killed Sarah Mumford? Who is Sarah Mumford? Well, my guest today will reveal all, well, maybe not all, because she is the author of a mystery fiction book. And what a fascinating one. It's called Hidden. And to explain why it's so fascinating, let's go straight into our discussion with Michelle Graff, author of Hidden. Hi, Michelle. Welcome to the True Fiction Project.
Hello, Reenita. Thank you for having me.
So great to have you on the show. So I have to ask you right off the bat, who is Sarah Mumford?
Sarah Mumford is a young girl who lived in 1899. Well, actually, she died in 1899 at the age of 15.
Yep.
And her murder or her death remains a mystery to this day. Historians, local history buffs still talk about her in the town of Pendleton, New York, and her death remains a mystery.
So I have so many questions because just any death is important, of course, but why was Sarah Mumford so talked about, so important? Why is her death a mystery? How are you involved in it? I mean, it is from 1899. I'm going to stop asking my questions for now.
Well, my interest in Sarah has to do with my own great-grandmother. And I have to tell you, I have been compelled to tell my great-grandmother's story since before I even knew her name. Because I grew up, my father didn't know the name of his grandmother. My grandmother didn't know the name of her mother. And I found this very odd and concerning. So when I was old enough to start researching, I began doing my family history, very focused on this woman who was my great-grandmother. Her name was Amelia. And I discovered the reason why her name had been forgotten is she was an unwed mother. She was a teenager when when she gave birth to my grandmother. And it got me thinking about, I wanted to know so much more about the story. So I started researching that time period in the town that she was in. And that's how I came across the mystery of Sarah Mumford. Sarah Mumford was also a teenager in the same town, same time. And she was rumored to be pregnant at the time of her death.
Ooh.
And she was also unmarried. She was a young girl that was a ward of a family. They called her adopted daughter, but there was a lot more to the story than that.
Okay.
So I became intrigued in learning more about Sarah in order to learn about my great-grandmother. And the more I researched, the more I discovered so many parallels to their story.
Oh my goodness.
And I also became
obsessed,
upset, outraged, but also wanted to solve the mystery. And so it took sort of an investigative turn in my research. And I really wanted to find out more about Sarah, tell her story at the same time, tell my grandmother's story, who also, her story did not have necessarily a happy ending either. And I just felt like it was my way of perhaps giving justice to these two girls who lived in a time where women and children were not treated well. And there are many things I came across that really parallel things that we struggle with today.
What were the circumstances of her death, or is that the mystery that hasn't been solved?
Well, that's the mystery, but I discovered there was really a lot that I could learn in doing the research in old newspapers, because it was very popular at the time. People were very interested, not just in the town of Pendleton, but the circumstances of the case really caught the attention of the whole nation at the time.
Why?
And the circumstances were that she was found on train tracks. So originally they thought it was a suicide. And probably in most circumstances, it would have just been brushed off as a suicide or an accident. People were hit by trains often then because there weren't train crossings. But the coroner on the case was somebody that was very diligent in his investigation, and he didn't let it go. He knew something was odd about this mystery. And when he began his inquiry, witnesses came forward telling a different story of what was happening to Sarah in the home. And she was not necessarily the loved adopted daughter that the family had portrayed her to be. They were using her more as a servant, which was something that often happened to children taken in by families from orphanages. And they were, in a sense, indentured servants. That was not that uncommon at the time. But the real mystery took a turn when an autopsy was done. They actually exhumed her body and discovered that Sarah was dead before the train hit her. And they could tell that at the time by the lack of blood evidence on the scene.
Interesting. And all of this was published in newspapers? I mean, that was your research? Yeah.
It was. Nobody had, since that time, really compiled all the facts together. There had been articles written about it, but I went back and found all of the articles and tried to piece together the timeline. Also did background research on the different participants, the different suspects, to find out how they connected together. I also did research on Sarah and found her orphanage records and found more information about who she was. And I don't want to give away too many spoilers in the story, but things were different than they appeared to be. And so the mystery, the more that was uncovered, both by the investigator at the time and myself doing the research, the more questions there were and the more interesting the case became.
My goodness, this is fascinating. So I can only begin to imagine the kind of research you've done. And you've talked about going through old newspapers. Was that the primary source, or what else did you look at?
Much of my primary sources were the newspapers, and I had to consider those primary sources, though I did have to fact check them because in some cases they were very accurately based on transcripts from the inquest. In some cases they were sensationalized because even in 1899 there was fake news. And so I did have to do
some things don't change.
I also used a lot of the skills I learned as a genealogical hobbyist. I do my own family research, and a lot of those genealogy techniques I was able to apply to my research. I am neither a historian or a professional genealogist, but I use some of the techniques of both to string together the story.
Amazing.
So I found a lot of things in the records, the genealogical records. I also found a lot of context by studying the history of the child welfare system, how, forensics at the time, everything to put the story into a context, because context matters when you want to really understand what happens in a story.
Fascinating to hear you say that, because 1899 is obviously way too early to go through a 23andMe DNA test. So it's amazing that you could find all of these other sources and had the energy and put in the effort to do so. So I have to ask the inevitable question: was Sarah Mumford, or do you think she was your great grandmother?
Well, this is a spoiler alert. I believe somebody was responsible for her death, and that her body was placed on those tracks to cover a more horrific crime than even murder. And it has to do with how she was treated. It has to do with really something larger and bigger than just a story about human trafficking, is what we would call it today.
Goodness.
But how children left in orphanages, or who found their way in orphanages for whatever reason, and she was not actually an orphan, were vulnerable and exploited by people who wanted to profit or gain things for their own reason.
So are you suggesting, or do we understand from this, that she was maybe sold by her family to...
Not stolen. She was put in the orphanage for legitimate reasons, but she had family that wanted her, and she was indentured out for profit.
Oh my God.
And then once that happens, the family loses contact, and she doesn't have any way to get back to them, even though she desired to, because she was bound by a contract.
And where did your grandmother go when she was born?
My grandmother, the baby in the case,
yes, the baby,
was born the summer this whole inquest was happening. And as it turns out, she was eventually raised by my grandfather's family. So I needed to find out how she got separated from her mother, too. Her family did not want her to be in an orphanage. She did spend a very short time in an orphanage, but they wanted that baby and wanted to keep her, and did everything they could. But unfortunately, some other circumstances happened, and she also met a terrible fate. Her mother did. And the shame and the stigma behind the fact that she was illegitimate, I believe, became the reason why her mother's story was not shared with her, not even her name. And so then lost to her ancestors. And for me, sharing, her name was Amelia, and sharing Amelia's name is very important to me. And sharing Sarah's name, because there were so many, the name of the story is hidden for a reason, because there were so many of these young girls that were hidden away. What happened to them was hidden away, and they were literally hidden away because there was so much shame and stigma around unwed pregnancies. But there were other reasons why girls were hidden at the time. And so there's different layers to that title. But I believe that for me, the truth was hidden. The greatest form of justice is the truth. And so I just want to tell these stories. And I think a lot of what happened to these girls is still relevant today, maybe not to the same extreme, but we still have issues of human trafficking throughout our world. And I think there's some relationship to what happened then and what's going on now. Different circumstances, of course, but I still think it's an important issue for people to talk about.
Very, very important. I mean, there's so many issues that you touch upon: human trafficking, hidden truths, identity, which is huge. I can completely understand why you have just spent your life doing this. So what did you do? You wrote a book. When did that come out? Tell us a little bit more about how this story has evolved for you.
So when I decided to tell the stories, I knew they fit together for many reasons that I won't reveal here. So I wrote the story. It's two alternating narratives of the two girls' lives. One follows the investigation of Sarah Mumford in that summer of 1899. And that one is a narrative nonfiction. Even the descriptions came from my research. Any quotes came from primary sources. Amelia's story, my great-grandmother's story, follows the same timeline. It was that summer that Amelia was pregnant with my grandmother. It is also a true story. So all the major events, all the characters or the people are true. But I did create dialogue. And that's where the nonfiction part comes in. That would be historical fiction. It's based on a true story, but I don't know what she was thinking or those conversations she had with her parents. I tried to make sure I based them on what I had learned in my research, how women were treated at the time, how townspeople in the town of Pendleton viewed the murder and things they were saying about the case. And I also found out in my research that my family had other connections to the case that I won't reveal here today. So they were very connected to this case in many ways. The stories made sense to tell them together.
Right. Okay, well, I cannot wait to hear your read. Before we do, though, let us know where we can find your book and your books in general.
It is on Amazon, and it's wide, so you could find it with any bookstore, but probably the easiest way would just be on Amazon.
Okay.
Its name is Hidden, The Unsolved Mystery of Sarah Mumford.
Amazing. I cannot wait to sort of dig into it. This sounds like a perfect binge read. Okay. And having said that, you're going to read for us.
I picked a passage first about my grandmother. So this is not about the case of Sarah Mumford. This is one of the stories about my grandmother. I'm going to just set it up. Amelia was an unwed mother. She was at the time not sure what would happen to her. Her parents had not made her leave the home. This is not something you could just tell everybody was going on. So she didn't know because of the tension. Her father couldn't look her in the eye. She was having arguments with her mother. She wasn't sure that they would even allow her to stay after the baby was born. She also had not revealed the father yet. And she was afraid to do so because he didn't want her to tell anyone who he was. And so this passage takes place the day my grandmother was born.
And now to the premise of the True Fiction Project, which of course is to create fiction out of nonfiction.
Amelia opened her heavy eyelids and tried to lift her head. Exhausted, she laid it back on the pillow and closed her eyes again. The last thing she remembered was her mother placing the baby on her chest to feed. The baby! Where's my baby? She opened her eyes again and tried to focus on the objects around her. She heard a tiny cry. The doctor was standing near her. Where's my baby? She said, her voice hoarse from the screams of her labor. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. She had been standing at her bedside all along. It was Rika, not the doctor, that did most of the delivery. The doctor arrived when it was almost over. Dr. Hellwig is checking her over, Amelia's mother said. Amelia looked at the doctor as he examined the infant. She recognized him. It was the same doctor who had come the night her sister Rachel had died 4 years earlier. Dr. Hellwig handed the baby back to Rika. She looks healthy, he said. Rika swaddled the baby and placed her back in Amelia's arms. Amelia felt a wave of relief. She had been so afraid of the pain, afraid of what would happen to her. But it had not occurred to her to be afraid of the baby until now. Dr. Hellwig placed his stethoscope back in his leather satchel and pulled out a pencil and a dark green notebook. He sat down in the chair next to the bed and jotted a few things in his book. What would the child's name be? He asked. Maud, Amelia answered. Maud Amanda. The doctor scribbled the name. Amelia looked down at her daughter. She was so small, so helpless. It was her job to protect her. She thought about what her mother said about facing her problems. She looked at Dr. Hellwig. He closed his book and held it in his hand.
Oh my gosh, Michelle. I don't even know what to begin to say. You read so beautifully. That is so tear-jerking. And
I have trouble reading it without getting emotional.
But you write so beautifully. I mean, it never occurred to her to be afraid of the baby. Oh my gosh, It's just so emotive. I can't wait till our listeners check out this podcast episode and go straight to Amazon, straight to your book. Thank you so much for joining us today on the True Fiction Project.
Thank you for having me, Reenita.
That was Michelle Graff, the author of Hidden. Definitely check out her book immediately on Amazon. All links are in the show notes. And for our paid subscribers, she's going to read us something else, a little extra special. This is the True Fiction Project. I am your host, Reenita Hora.
Thank you for listening to the True Fiction Project with Reenita Hora. Be sure to subscribe to the newsletter to receive more inspiring stories showing how fiction is born from our everyday experiences. For more information, visit www.truefictionproject.com.